Hello everyone, I'm back to do a quick video on equal protection for my con law portion of the bar exam. Equal protection, let's get started, and I have a little flow chart too for this one. Equal protection, the EPC clause. The EPC of the 14th Amendment, applicable to the federal government through the 5th Amendment, prohibits the government from treating similarly situated persons differently. Okay, so federal government's 5th Amendment, 14th Amendment is to the states. EPC continued, only applies to government. State does not apply to private. Not private. We don't write this up if it's a private actor. Doesn't apply to them. Is there a group? First question you ask yourself, is there a group or category of people being discriminated against? Okay. If yes, then we're going to go to the next one down here. If no, then EPC is not an issue. If there's not people being discriminated against, this would not be an issue. So yes, there are people being discriminated. We go to, is the discrimination intentional or incidental? Okay, intentional means it's on its face, and incidental means the effect of the act. Okay, so there's two different ones there. EPC continued. If intentional, we're going to go to the next one. What is the discrimination based on? What level of review is needed? And the classification. Okay, so these are the 3 steps for intentional, and I'll go over those. So the levels of review, let's talk about the levels of review first. Levels of review, there are strict scrutiny, which we've been talking about a lot in my other con law videos, intermediate scrutiny, and rational basis test. There's 3 levels of review that we need to use for these, depending on what triggers these, what facts trigger these, and I'll show you what facts will trigger them. Okay, so strict scrutiny requires the government to prove that the classification is necessary to achieve a compelling government interest. We see these words all the time on our MBEs. Necessary to achieve compelling. As soon as you see compelling, you're going to think of the strict scrutiny test. Okay? And remember, always remember for MBEs, the burden is on who? The burden is on the government to prove this. The government to prove that the regulation or classification, for EPC, its classification is necessary to achieve a compelling government interest. Now, basically, strict scrutiny is going to be used if your MBE or say is based on fundamental rights. Voting in the state and local elections, except, this is an exception for MBEs, I've seen this, special purpose districts. Okay, we won't use it. So voting in state and local elections, political candidate, having access to the courts, travel state to state, and First Amendment rights. All of these fundamental rights. If you see any of these, you're going to bring up strict scrutiny. Also, race, national origin, and alienage. All of these will be based on strict scrutiny, necessary to achieve a compelling government interest, and then you do your arguments using the facts. Go to intermediate scrutiny, requires the government to prove that the classification is substantially related. These are the key words for intermediate scrutiny. Substantially related to an important. Every time you see the word important, think of IS, intermediate scrutiny. Government interest, you know the burden is still on the government here. This rule applies to gender, illegal aliens, legitimacy. Those are just some of them that I've seen. Gender, illegal aliens, legitimacy would be intermediate scrutiny. Now let's go to our last one, which is the rational basis test. Rational basis test rule, the challenger must prove that the government interest is not rationally related to a legitimate government interest. So obviously here the burden of proof is on the challenger, for this is the only one where the challenger has to prove. And you'll see in your MBEs, they trick you. They ask you who the burden of proof is. Now you have to look at what we're talking about. If we're talking about elderly, wealth, disability, age, height, or weight, or non-residents, we are going to say the challenger. The burden is on the challenger, okay? To prove that the government interest is not rationally related to a legitimate government interest. So rational basis test, non-residents, elderly, wealth, disability, age, height, weight, basically everything else. Everything else that is not intermediate scrutiny or strict scrutiny. Now we're going to go to the classifications. Classifications at issue when people are treated differently based on classifications. So there's a suspect class, a quasi-suspect class, and the non-suspect class. Basically, the suspect class is strict scrutiny, quasi-suspect, intermediate scrutiny we're going to use, and non-suspect is going to be the rational basis test. Okay, for classifications. So suspect class, let's go over it quickly. It includes only those based on race, national origin, and state alienage, just like we said about it before, not U.S. citizens. So they are subject to strict scrutiny and also fundamental rights if they're a suspect class. Quasi-suspect class, intermediate scrutiny, that includes gender and illegitimacy. Non-suspect means everything else, economic welfare, social welfare. We're going to use the rational basis test for review for non-suspect class. Now, the EPC fact triggers on MBEs and on essays are if you see treating individuals differently for any reason at all, denying benefits or funds to selected individuals, charging more money to events to certain individuals, only allowing select companies to conduct business. So all of these are fact triggers that I've seen when I go through my MBEs and essays. Okay, so let's go ahead and do our chart. Where's our chart? And I'll go ahead and show you guys our quick write-up. So if you get an essay for this, you can jot this down quickly just to keep you focused on where you're going. It's called a flow chart. I call them flow chart. That's what I've used in law school, and also I've actually made them condensed them a little bit more since I've been studying for the bar exam. So we're going to do equal protection. Let's do it right here. Equal protection is going to be my equal protection. Then I'm going to ask myself let's do the rule first, of course, rule. And then I'm going to ask myself the first question. Is there a group or category of people being discriminated? So group or category of people being discriminated. I ask myself that. Okay. And if it's yes, I'm going to go out this way. If it's no, it's just not an issue. Stop writing on EPC, not going to work. Okay, so if it's yes, we go out this way. And then we ask ourselves, is it on its face, intentional, or accidental? So intentional, or is it accidental? Incidental, based on the effect. Okay, so intentional or incidental. And if it's intentional, then we're going to go out this way. And we're going to ask ourselves, what's it based on? What's the discrimination based on? Is it based on race, gender, or anything else? Race, gender, or anything else. And obviously, if it's based on race or fundamental right, then we're going to write on strict scrutiny. If it's based on illegal aliens or legitimacy or gender, we're going to write on intermediate scrutiny. If it's based on anything else like economic welfare, we are going to write on the rational basis test. These are where you use your facts, okay? And basically come up with a conclusion after that. And that's if it's incidental. That is if it's intentional, on its face. After intentional, you ask yourself, is it based on race, national origin, or fundamental rights? Is it based on gender, illegitimacy? Or is it based on anything else? And that's when we do our tests, strict scrutiny, intermediate scrutiny, rational basis test, and you give a conclusion. Now let's say it's based on incidental. Incidental. Okay, we're going to automatically use the rational basis test. Based on the effect, it's going to be upheld if reasonably related to legitimate government interest. Burdens on the challenger here, and the person challenging the law is one of them. Usually you go to the SDP flowchart after this, which would be the due process flowchart, which I did on my last video. Okay, I've mostly seen this on essays It's actually intentional on its face. De jure. Okay, so that's the flow chart. Let's go back to my share screen. Now I'm going to make one more slide for you really quick, because I always do this slide and I didn't insert it this time. My next slide is the con law approach. Do you have a insert? So con law approach. I do this every single one. I don't know why I forgot it on this one. So it's the JSPFLLI. You guys remember that? Justiciability, state action, power of the states, federal powers, limitation on state powers, and last limitation on federal powers and individual rights, which I'm working on right now. So these are all the big main issues. Once you spot the main issues, then you need to know what are the inner issues, like justiciability. We're going to talk about mootness, ripeness if needed, 11th Amendment, advisory opinion, all of that stuff. So these are the big issues that you can write down as a quick flow chart and then use them to approach your essay. So that's my video for equal protection. Good luck on the bar exam, and I'll see you guys on my next video.